But the big story that's breaking this evening, the Narendra Modi government at a union cabinet meeting has taken a major decision. The union cabinet a short while ago approved in principle disinvestment of Air India. Finance Minister Arun Jaitley briefed the media this evening, announced the cabinet's big decision. He said the cabinet is now setting up a committee under his charge to work out how this decision to disinvest Air India can be implemented. This is the big step towards selling off the Maharajah. Remember, India Today was the first to break this story a couple of weeks back, saying the government was all set to privatize Air India. Listen in to what Arun Jaitley said a short while ago.
एयर इंडिया की डिसइन्वेस्टमेंट को सैद्धांतिक रूप से स्वीकृति दी गई, इन प्रिंसिपल अप्रूवल। और सिविल एविएशन मंत्रालय की जो प्रस्तावना थी कि फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर की अध्यक्षता में एक ग्रुप बने जो इसकी बाकी सारी मोडालिटीज को तय करे, उसको स्वीकार किया गया। कितना डिसइन्वेस्ट होगा, किस प्रक्रिया के माध्यम से होगा, उसके एसेट्स के संबंध में, उसके डेट के संबंध में, होटल कंपनीज के संबंध में, ये सारी जो प्रक्रिया और निर्णय हैं, ये अब ग्रुप लेगा।
Okay, that's Arun Jaitley giving the first hint that Air India could be disinvested. Remember, these are the big figures of Air India. The total debt, 52,000 crores. Loans for aircraft, 20,000 crores. Working capital loan, 30,000 crores. Debt service loan, 6,500. The government's equity infusion, 2,500. Depreciation is 1,500 crores. Air India would need to borrow at least 2,500 crores per annum. Okay, let me at this moment also tell you about the shrinking share of Air India. Indigo Airlines, 39.9% of the total market share at the moment. Jet Airways, 18.4%. Air India, 14.3%. SpiceJet, 12.7%. Go Air, 8.3%. Others, 6.5%. Let's go straight across to Rahul Srivastava, who's joining us as to what next for the government. Rahul, that decision announced in the cabinet saying that the disinvestment will take place, but first is being sent to a committee. Is the government planning this on priority basis, or will they delay it through this committee being set up?
Rajdeep, what one can certainly say is that the days of the Maharajahs are over as far as competitive economies are concerned. With the private sector doing so well that the Air India shares shrinking to 14%, it's almost a writing on the wall that the Air India sooner than later will be disinvested. The government has given in principle clearance to disinvestment of the Air India, which is the official airline. But the fact is that the committee has been very clearly told that this has to be done very fast, because the operational losses, if you look at Air India, even in the period of April-June 2017, is 600 odd crores. That's a huge amount of money, and especially in a factor, if you weave in the factor that this is a period in which Air India was planning certain amount of losses. So if you add up the two, the losses are higher than what the target really was. What top sources in the government are saying that there is plan to sell equity of Air India, in which government will like the majority stake to remain largely with the government, one. Second, what importantly, the government is keen to get an Indian stakeholder. It does not want the entry of a foreign player into it. They can have foreign tie-ups, but the entity which will be buying Air India will have to be Indian, perhaps because of the sentimental and emotional reasons involved with Air India. Importantly, what we are also hearing, that since there are 50,000 odd crores worth of losses to be tackled and no private entity would like such a millstone around the neck, the important factor in all this is that the government may have to go in for part writing off the debts of Air India. So eventually, even in the dying stages, Air India as a national carrier will be costing the exchequer certain amount of money.
Okay, Rahul Srivastava, we'll come back to you for more details, of course, as this story builds up. Let's tell you for a moment how this experiment of privatization of airlines has worked across the world and why the Maharajah may be next on the chopping block.
The story of Air India and the India story run parallel. The airline has been a national carrier since independence. But while a new India took off in the 90s, Air India was left far behind. The Maharajah is still struggling to keep pace with changing times and competition. Privatisation could be the bitter but life-saving drug the ailing airline needs. And India won't be the first to do so. In the late 80s, Margaret Thatcher had unleashed the privatisation revolution in the UK, and she forced British Airways into a competitive market. A move that was opposed by labour unions and the opposition, which alleged crony capitalism. But the airlines took a giant leap to become the world's most profitable airline in 1990s, earning the tag of world's favourite airline. And its good run continues even post-Brexit, where it posted record operating profit of £1.4 billion in 2016. The Kiwis have done it twice. After privatisation of their national carrier in 1989, Air New Zealand reported a series of losses, forcing the government to step in and take over control in 2001. It later sold 20% of its stake to reduce holding to 53% to raise funds, and has turned profitable. Even the popular German airline Lufthansa was fully privatized in 1997 to tackle bankruptcy and has seen considerable growth, reporting net profit of $1.9 billion in the last fiscal. But privatization of Air India might not be a cakewalk. Neighbouring Sri Lanka is looking at selling off its national carrier to reduce debt and is scouting for buyers. So for the Modi government, Air India's sale will face some global competition, though the size of India's domestic market, which is yet to be fully tapped, works to the centre's advantage. If past lessons are anything to go by, privatization of Air India is a move needed for changing times. Bureau Report, India Today.
Okay, let me then go to Raj Chengappa, editorial director of India Today. This was the story, the cover of India Today a couple of weeks ago. The end of Air India. You predicted the end, Raj. Is this the beginning of the end? Because in the past also, governments have threatened to sell off Air India, including Vajpayee's government, importantly a BJP government in the past, and backed out at the last moment. This time, is the momentum such, or is Mr. Modi convinced that Air India must go?
I think so. I think firstly the debt that they've accumulated, which you pointed out earlier, 50,000 crores, they're unable to service it. They're still borrowing at the rate of 2,500 crores. They have loans totaling a working capital loan of 30,000 crores. It makes it completely unviable. They're just pushing down money down the drain for India. What you can see now is that the process is on. When they announced, when Mr. Jaitley announced that a committee is going to go and headed by him, the idea is that Air India might have lost 50,000 crores, but it has a lot of assets, apart from the fact that the planes themselves are worth 20,000 crores. So if the 30,000 crores, how does one make it up? And that's the big question. Air India has a lot of subsidiaries. It also has properties. Now, I think the exploration is to see how much of this can be sold off, because no private entity is going to come right in and pick it up with that kind of debt.
Because on May 31st, Civil Aviation Minister Ashok Gajapati Raju had said finding a bakra for Air India may not be easy. Do you believe that it will be a difficult task with this huge debt to find someone, unless you're willing to do 100% disinvestment, not just part disinvestment? You will have to be ready to sell the entire assets.
You will have to do both. Firstly, you will have to strip it of its assets and meet a lot of its working capital debt. That is 30,000 crores, because 20,000 crores you have aircraft in any case which you can sell. Now, once you strip it off, no private airline would like to come in if the government is holding the controlling stake. Again, you'll have the Babu sitting on the in this thing. Airline business is, for instance, the most dynamic business. You have to take quick decisions. You have to make purchase decisions that can't subsequently be questioned by the CAG. This is not something that a government should be doing. I think
so it can't be minority stake.
It cannot. I mean, it cannot be a minority stake for a private airline. The government will have to concede 51% to a private airline if it really is serious about the business. But I think, Rajiv, let's give them credit. This is the first big bang sort of thing that is there, where Mr. Modi had always said that the government shouldn't be in the business of business. I think this is a signature move, and therefore I think he's going to proceed. This is not a move to just sort of say, let's try something.
Okay, let's check that. We'll get more voices. Narendra Taneja, spokesperson of the BJP, joining me. Mr. Taneja, is the government going to bite the bullet Or is this another false dawn? I think for a long time people have said Air India must go out of government's hands. It's not the government's business to be running a bleeding airline at the cost of the taxpayer. Is Mr. Modi going to bite the bullet on Air India?
Well, if there is consensus within BJP, within NDA, that the government should move ahead in that direction. And I think if you listen carefully, there seems to be a national consensus too on the issue that go and privatize Air India. Do something about it. It's too much. Why should the poor Indian be subsidizing Air India? People are asking this question in the street, in rooms and in columns and so on and so forth. So the question is that now what is the alternative? In order to save Air India, it's important that you move in that direction. Number one. Number two, Air India is a great asset, is a great name, is a great brand name. But it doesn't necessarily mean that only government can run it or the ownership should be only with the government. 2017 is different from 2002. This is a different time. Our economy is much bigger. Confidence is much bigger. FDI is at high, record high level. And at the same time, overall, if you look at the aviation industry, it's growing very fast. But then you compare it with China. China has got 5,000 aircraft. Indian aviation sector is very small compared to the Chinese. And if we don't do something about Air India, how would we attract more investment? How we would attract more players to come and actually, set up airlines in this country?
I understand that, Mr. Taneja.
Existing airlines.
I understand that.
So we need to do something about it. We need to change the culture.
No, I appreciate that. My worry is that in the past, politicians have tried to sell off Air India and found themselves hitting against various vested interests that want to retain power. The bureaucrats want to retain power. There are the unions which will resist any sell-off of Air India. There will be those who will invoke national pride when it comes to the question of Air India. I just want to know, tomorrow if an Emirates airline, for example, comes in and says, we want a majority stake in Air India, but we want management, operational and financial control. Will the government of India say that no, this is a question of national pride? Or is the government convinced that there is no national pride left in continuing to manage badly a bleeding airline?
First of all, 2017 is a different year, as I said. The government is clear, and I said there is a consensus within the party and within NDA, and as I said, there is a consensus in the country. Now, in question of how to go about it, quantum of, stake sale, etc., these are the decisions will be taken by a ministerial panel. Remember, it's a ministerial panel headed by the Finance Minister himself. This shows very clearly the kind of resolve of the government. This is not just any other panel. It's a ministerial panel headed by the Finance Minister. So this shows the resolve. As far as the employees are concerned and all that, this would only lead to a better Air India. So who owns it? How does it really matter? As long as the company is in good shape and the company basically leads to a better future.
Let me take that to KVJ Rao. He's the General Secretary, Cabin Crew Association, Air India. Mr. Rao, you've heard the big decision that the government has taken. They have in principle agreed to disinvest from Air India. Will unions now oppose this, or do you accept the time has come now to sell off Air India? The longer you delay, the more difficult it will be to sell Air India. For your own future, for the future of the airline, you may have to accept the sale.
Involved himself stating that he will not allow any kind of discussion based on media report, for which Stalin replied, this is not media report, I have the evidence in my hand.
Mr. Rao, can you hear me?
Sorry, Rajdeep, you broke in between, but what I understand from your station is that whether we will oppose the privatization.
Yes.
Nobody opposes a good thing that's happening to the company. But what we need to understand is what brought it to this stage. Like even today, Modi ji, with all his vigor, sent as a bureaucrat to work in the company. But still the looting and the plundering didn't stop. You see, at the end of the day, when we talk of privatization, the partnership issue is going to be an issue. Who's going to call the shots? Like today, we have a CBO who looted the company. No action has been taken against them. So these are issues. See, let me make things very clear, Rajdeep. We are not against privatization. The employees need to know what exactly is happening to them. Because the employees were not responsible for what happened to the company. Because the decisions made by government, previous government, I am not blaming this government. What we need to understand is that we are not responsible for the losses. We have put in our best under the given circumstances. Equipments don't work. There is no proper facility. But still, the employees have given their 100%. And I can be honest and say we have done more than 100%. So today, we are looking at why are we being blamed for the company to be sold off.
Why are you being blamed? You make a valid point. You make a valid point, and I think Raj Chengappa, there is a point. I was hoping to be joined by Jitendra Bhargava. Hopefully he will join us. We are having a problem with his line, but he has made this point also in a book that he has written, that Air India has been destroyed by the government. It's the government and the way it's run Air India. It's been badly managed. This was an ideal airline of JRD Tata all those years. It's been badly managed by the government, and now the employees say they are being made to pay for the sins of the ministers, the sins of the bureaucrats. Do you agree with that argument?
Well, there's no reason to stop the disinvestment. To say that, you know, the government is at fault, now it should continue to be at fault and continue to pump money into the airline. They have tried various management, they've tried to turn the airline around, but they've not succeeded. And the debt is just too high for anyone to really service, even if they do outstandingly well. Now let's look at also in terms of the propitious time that it is. Firstly, Indigo, which is one of the top airlines, beaten, as you said, 39% of the share. When you fly Indigo, do you ask, is this a foreign or an Indian airline? Are you really concerned as a flyer? You're saying, I want an airline that's efficient, runs on time, cheap, and if it's Indian, that's great. So I think what we are seeing is, and the second thing is that we've got an aviation boom. Air India is losing even at the time that you have a 21% growth in civil aviation. There's 100 million passengers and expected to grow to even, to around 500 million. You would need a lot more aircraft and airlines to service it. Now, if you're still going at a loss at a critical time when it is booming, then it has got into a debt trap that it cannot win at all. And I think it's time that we all realized that, India can be a hub for aviation. Look at the way you've developed Singapore. Look at the way Emirates has developed. Now, you could argue that these were all government-owned airlines, but they did allow a lot of professional management to come in. They virtually just pumped money into it. It's a different thing. If we give it to a private airline, of course, hold some stake if we want to, but not very limited. If someone, say, like the Tatas, combines with another foreign airlines like Singapore, they then develop India into a major aviation hub, why would you and I object to? It is not our money, that taxpayers' money that's getting into. And you cannot then hold 2 wrongs or 3 wrongs doesn't make a right to say, let's continue to run Air India in the shoddy way it is doing.
Good point. And Jitendra Bhargava, who wrote that book on Air India and how it was destroyed, he believes, by the ministers and the bureaucrats, joining me on the phone line. Mr. Bhargava, do you believe that it's not a moment too soon, the government's decision to sell off Air India, at least take that first important step by clearing in principle the disinvestment? And would you favor a complete 100% disinvestment of Air India?
Rajdeep, the government deserves compliments for putting Air India's on fast track and giving an in-principle approval for the privatization of Air India. I am convinced right from the time I wrote the book that Air India in its current avatar can neither thrive nor survive nor be revived. So something drastic had to be done. And it's a very welcome sign that the government is deciding to privatize it. Now the question is, what percentage of equity should government shed? I am a believer that 100% of the equity must be given because of the kind of political indiscipline we have. If government has a stake in Air India, they will continue to meddle, what we have witnessed in the past 10 years. Because as one of the union guys was saying here on your program, he's very right that bulk of the problems have been caused by government decisions. Now, but the reality is, in today's state, if you need a robust airline, Air India to be great again, Air India needs to be privatized. And the faster it is done, the better. Because if there is a further delay in it, Air India will only get further marginalized, making it even less lucrative. But my only point has been, on which I differ with the way the process is going, that let us not lay far greater emphasis on the debt that Air India has on its balance sheet while overlooking the assets that Air India has, because Air India assets are phenomenal. The Air India subsidiary airlines, Air India Express, Alliance Air, besides the engineering services, the ground handling services, the parking slots of various airports, are real assets. So any airline that acquires Air India will get on a platter not only these assets, depending on how the government wants to sell of the airline, but also as a starting point, a market share of 17%. But one point I must clarify. You said at the beginning of the program that Air India has 14% market share. Now, let's not get this fact. The 14% market share is in the domestic market, and Air India deploys only 25% of its capacity. 75% of its capacity is deployed on international sectors, whereas in the case of Indigo and Jet, it is the reverse. So there has need to be correction, and while I'm all for privatization, but I want transparency, accountability, and last of all, not a controversy to follow Air India's sale.
Okay. I think we are all, there is a consensus barring you, Mr. Rao, at the moment that the time has come, not a moment too late for Air India to go, is what Mr. Jitendra Bhargava says. Yes, there have been mistakes committed by our political leadership that have perhaps brought Air India to this pass, Mr. Rao, but that surely you will agree is no reason not to sell. Will you at least concede, or am I going to see opposition by the unions? Will the unions oppose this decision, or have the unions also seen the writing on the wall?
Rajdeep, we come back to this fundamental question. Are we selling to make the company better, or are we selling it to just make money out of the company?
No, we are selling because the taxpayer, because we believe that the taxpayer, we should sell because of a good business decision. It's a good business decision to do it. You ultimately need to save the money of the taxpayer and the government. Why should the government be, in a way, subsidizing an airline that is being run to the ground?
No, Rajdeep, I also pay my taxes. The government also makes taxes from me. So I am also a taxpayer, and it is my money also that's going into the company. But you have to understand that decisions have to be made. You see, we change decisions every day. Or rather, I can say that we change decisions every minute. You take a decision today, you get a call from somebody, you have to change it. Like, I'll give you a simple example. Today, Air India is paying transportation costs for its crew at around 25 rupees a kilometer. You're getting it at 6 rupees anywhere else, 7 rupees anywhere else. So who's benefiting from these contracts? You look at all the contracts and there is a kickback.
Which is why we are saying, which is exactly why we are saying, get out of the business of flying airlines. Let's avoid all these kickbacks. Let's avoid the manner of an airline being run to the ground. Maybe Mr. Modi has taken a bold decision, and maybe this is a decision that perhaps needed to be taken a long time ago, but many will say better late than never. Let me leave it there, because I think we've got a sense at the moment this is only the first step, remember, that has been. Yes, you wanted a final word, Raj.
Just a quick point addressing the concerns of both the union member as well as what Mr. Bhargava raised is very relevant, in the sense that when we get down to actually selling it, let us make sure we get the best value of the assets that is there, that there shouldn't be a scandal as it normally happens, that, you know, you sell these assets and someone else brings a CAG report to say you sold it cheap, and we are back to the same rigmarole. I think it's very important, and what the government has done is going step by step, getting a ministerial body to look at it, then assessing the assets, then selling it, so that even as we sell it, and I believe it's going to be a clean sale, there is no questions being asked that there's a deal that had been made and brought there. Let us also be proud that we're going to get an Air India. It's not disappearing in that way, but it'll be in a different avatar, better, and maybe less taxes for us.
Thanks very much, Raj, for that. And to all my guests, and to India Today, which broke this story a couple of weeks ago, the end for the Maharajah. Where do we stand? My take. Air India was once the pride of the nation. The past tense is deliberate because the Maharajah has long since lost its sheen. The decision to sell off Air India hasn't come a moment too soon. The state needs to get out of the aviation industry and push for total disinvestment. When Narendra Modi came to power, he promised less government, more governance. This is as good a moment as any to live up to that promise. Let Air India fly without burdening the state or the taxpayer. It might just soar higher as a result.